The women of Umudike would later swear that the trouble started before the bride even arrived. The drums were too loud, the smiles were too wide, and the groom, Chukwudi, laughed as though he was trying to convince himself that joy was real. By noon, the compound was overflowing. Palm wine spilled like blessings. The air smelled of roasted meat and promise. And Kiru, the bride, stepped out dressed in white and gold, her skin glowing, her eyes soft with hope. She looked like a woman whose life had finally begun. People whispered in admiration. See how lucky Chukwudi is. God has favored him. She is perfect. And Kiru heard every word, and her heart swelled. She'd waited years for this day. Years of rejection. Years of men who admired her beauty but never stayed. When Chukwudi proposed, she believed her suffering had ended, that God had finally remembered her name. The ceremony passed in cheers and ululations. Elders prayed, gifts were exchanged, photographs were taken, smiles frozen forever in time. By sunset, Nkiru was a wife. By nightfall, the world began to crack. The door to the marital room closed behind them with a soft wooden thud. Outside, laughter continued. Inside, silence grew heavy. Minutes passed, then longer minutes. Nkiru sat on the bed, her heart racing, her hands trembling with the nervous excitement every new bride knows. Chukwudi stood near the wall, not looking at her. When he finally turned, his face had changed. Not anger, not desire, fear. He stepped back. What is it? She asked softly. He didn't answer. He sat down slowly, his hands on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might open and swallow him. The silence stretched until it hurt. Nkiru, he said finally, his voice thin. Something is wrong. Her stomach dropped. What do you mean? She whispered. He stood up abruptly, adjusted his clothes, and walked toward the door. Before opening it, he turned and looked at her, not with love, but with accusation. This marriage, he said, cold and sharp, was a mistake. The door opened. Night air rushed in, and with it the sound of footsteps running. By dawn, the drums were silent. By sunrise, whispers had replaced songs. And before the village finished eating the leftover wedding food, Nkiru was no longer a wife. No explanation, no mercy. Only one sentence spreading like fire. She was not suitable. And just like that, her marriage ended on the same day it began, while the man who destroyed her walked free, carrying a secret he would rather let her die with than admit aloud. Nkiru woke up to voices, not gentle ones, not worried ones, whispers, sharp, curious, hungry. She lay still on the mat in her mother's house, staring at the cracked ceiling as the weight of the night crashed down on her all at once. Her wrapper was still neatly folded at her waist. Her wedding beads still clung to her ankles like a cruel joke. Outside, the village was already awake. Too awake. By tradition, a bride should not return to her father's compound the morning after her wedding. If she did, it meant only one thing, and everyone in Umudike knew it. Nkiru is back. She came alone. Something happened. Her mother, Ngozi-Aku, entered the room slowly, her eyes swollen from crying. She sat beside her daughter and touched her arm gently, as if afraid Nkiru might shatter. My daughter, she whispered. What did you do? The question cut deeper than a blade. I didn't do anything, Nkiru replied, her voice hoarse. He just left. Ngozi-Aku looked away. In Umudike, a man leaving was never the question. The question was always why the woman failed. Before Nkiru could explain, footsteps thundered into the compound. Chukwudi's family had arrived, his uncles, his mother, 2 elders from his lineage. They did not greet properly. They did not sit. Chukwudi's mother, Mama Ifunanya, folded her arms, and looked at Nkiru like something spoiled. "This marriage cannot continue," she said flatly. Nkosiaku gasped. "But why? What happened?" Mama Ifunanya clicked her tongue. "Ask your daughter. She knows." All eyes turned to Nkiru. Her throat tightened. I don't understand." Chukwudi's uncle stepped forward. "My son came home last night disturbed, confused, ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" Nkosiaku asked. The uncle lowered his voice, but not enough. He said he discovered something unsuitable. The word dropped like poison. Unsuitable. Women in the compound began to murmur. Heads leaned closer. Eyes widened. Mama Ifunanya spoke again, louder now. "We will not bring disgrace to our family. Bride price will be returned. The marriage is over." Just like that. No questions. No investigation. No chance for Nkiru to defend herself. Ngoziaku fell to her knees. "Please," she begged. "What exactly is the issue? Let us correct it." Mama Ifunanya laughed, short and cruel. "Some things cannot be corrected." Nkiru felt heat rush to her face. "What did he say I did?" she asked, trembling. Chukwudi's uncle hesitated, then spoke the sentence that would follow her for the rest of her life. "He said you are too much of a woman." Silence exploded, then laughter. Sharp, uncontrolled. Women covering their mouths. Men shaking their heads. Nkiru's ears rang. "That is a lie," she whispered. "I didn't even—" But they weren't listening. By midday, the story had changed. By afternoon, it had grown teeth. She trapped him. She deceived him. That's why no man stayed before. She's abnormal. By evening, Nkiru could not step outside without feeling eyes on her skin. Chukwudi, meanwhile, stayed hidden. He did not come to speak. He did not deny anything. He did not look back. Because if he did, someone might notice the truth shaking behind his silence. The truth he buried the moment he chose his pride over her life. And while Nkiru's name was being dragged through the dust, Chukwudi sat alone in his room, staring at his hands, whispering to himself, it had to be her. Because admitting the truth would have destroyed him, and destroying her was easier. By the third day, Nkiru's name no longer sounded like a person's name. It sounded like a warning. Women stopped talking when she passed. Children were pulled away by their mothers. Men stared too long. Their eyes filled with mockery and curiosity that burned her skin. She had become a story. She is the one, they whispered. The one it didn't work with. The one no man could handle. Nkiru stopped leaving the house. At night, she lay awake listening to her mother cry softly behind the wall. Her father had not spoken to her since the elder's visit. Shame sat in the compound like an uninvited guest, heavy and unmoving. On the fourth night, her aunt Uchi came to see her. Uche had always been blunt, the kind of woman who asked questions others were too afraid to voice. She sat across from Nkiru, studying her face carefully. "Tell me the truth," Uche said. "What happened in that room?" Nkiru swallowed. Her voice shook as she spoke. "We didn't even begin," she said. "He just froze. He stepped back like he had seen a ghost. Then he left." Uche frowned. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did you touch him?" "No." Silence stretched between them. Uche leaned back slowly. Then how did he suddenly discover this so-called problem? Nkiru's chest tightened. "I don't know." But somewhere deep inside her, a thought stirred. Small, frightening, and dangerous. That night, she remembered things she had ignored before. Chukwudi's reluctance whenever intimacy was mentioned, the jokes he avoided, the way he always changed the subject. She remembered how he drank heavily during the wedding feast, and how pale he looked when the door closed. A new fear crept in, not fear of herself, but of the truth. The next morning, Nkiru overheard something that confirmed it. Two women stood outside her mother's compound, unaware she was listening. I heard it's not really her fault, one whispered. Then whose? The other asked. Someone said Chukwudi has always had issues, that his first fiancée left quietly years ago. That can't be true. Why not? Men hide these things, but instead of admitting it, he threw her to the wolves. And Nkiru felt the ground tilt. Her knees buckled as realization slammed into her chest like a drum beat. It was never me. The humiliation, the divorce, the whispers, all of it was a lie built to protect one man's pride. Her hands shook as anger rose, hot, bitter, suffocating. She had been sacrificed. That evening, she confronted her mother. "Mama," she said quietly, "what if he lied?" Ngozi-Aku looked at her sharply. "Lied about what? What if he blamed me because he couldn't face his own truth?" Ngozi-Aku's eyes filled with fear, not for Chukwudi, but for her daughter. "Lower your voice," she whispered urgently. "Do you want to die in this village?" And Nkiru laughed softly. It sounded broken. "So I should carry a shame that isn't mine, just so a man can sleep peacefully?" Ngozi-Aku said nothing, because deep down she knew. And somewhere in Umudike, Chukwudi sat with his friends, forcing laughter, drinking palm wine, pretending to be whole, while a lie grew heavier with every breath he took. A lie that was already beginning to crack. Chukwudi did not leave Umudike. That was what hurt the most. If he had disappeared, Nkiru could have pretended the shame left with him. But he stayed, walking the same roads, drinking at the same palm wine joint, laughing loudly as if nothing had happened, as if she had not been destroyed overnight. Men slapped his back and told him he was brave. "You did the right thing," they said. "A man must protect his dignity. Better one night of shame than a lifetime of suffering." Each word stabbed deeper. Nkiru watched him once from behind her window. He looked healthy, relaxed, free. The same man who had run from her room like a thief now stood tall, joking with friends. That was when something inside her hardened. She decided to speak to him. Against her mother's pleas, Nkiru walked to the palm wine joint that evening. Conversation slowed when she appeared. Heads turned. Silence followed her like a shadow. Chukwudi saw her and froze. For a brief second, fear flashed across his face. Real fear. The kind she had seen only once before, on their wedding night. "Nkiru," he said quickly, standing up. "This is not the place." "That's funny," she replied calmly. "You didn't care about the place when you disgraced me." Men shifted uncomfortably. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Why did you lie?" Chukwudi swallowed. "I didn't." "You didn't even touch me," she said. "So what exactly did you discover?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chukwudi's jaw tightened. "Leave before you embarrass yourself further." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You already did that for me." She leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for those nearest to hear, "You know the truth, and one day it will come out." Chukwudi's face darkened. He grabbed her wrist roughly. "Do you want to ruin my life?" Nkiru met his eyes. "You already ruined mine." For a moment, it looked like he might speak, like he might confess, but pride won. He released her wrist and raised his voice. "This woman is unstable. That is why the marriage failed." Gasps filled the air. Nkiru stepped back as if struck. The men nodded. Someone laughed nervously. "Take her home," a man said. "She's still bitter." Bitter. That was the new word they gave her pain. Nkiru walked away slowly, her legs weak but her mind clear. Chukwudi would never tell the truth willingly, because the truth would make him smaller than the lie ever did. And as she crossed the village square, humiliation trailing behind her like dust, Nkiru made a quiet decision. If the truth was going to surface, she would have to force it into the light. even if it burned everything around it. After that night at the palm wine joint, something in Umudiki shifted. It was small at first, almost invisible, but Nkiru felt it. People still whispered, but the tone had changed. The laughter was quieter. The certainty in their voices was no longer solid. A crack had formed, because Nkiru had done something dangerous. She had asked questions, and questions were powerful. A week later, a woman named Ifeyinwa came to Nkiru's mother's compound under the cover of evening. She did not sit openly. She stood near the door, eyes darting, voice low. "I shouldn't be here," she said, "but what they did to you, it happened to someone else." Nkiru's heart skipped. "Who?" she asked. Ifeyinwa hesitated. "Do you remember Amaka, the seamstress who left the village 5 years ago?" Nkiru nodded slowly. Everyone remembered Amaka. She had been engaged once, quietly. No wedding, no celebration. Then one day, she packed her things and disappeared. "She was engaged to Chukwudi," Ifeyinwa whispered. The room seemed to tilt. "He told people it didn't work out," Ifeyinwa continued, "but I was close to her. She cried for weeks. She said the same thing you're saying now, that nothing happened, that he panicked." Nkiru's hands clenched into fists. "So he has done this before," she said. "Yes," Ifeyinwa replied, "but this time there was a wedding, too many witnesses, too much noise." The truth began to spread, not as an accusation, but as doubt. Women started connecting stories. A cousin who said Chukwudi always avoided intimacy. A friend who said he drank heavily whenever marriage was discussed. An uncle who once joked that Chukwudi feared being exposed. The jokes were no longer funny. Men began to look at him differently. Still, Chukwudi laughed louder than ever, drank more than ever, and avoided being alone with anyone who might ask real questions. At night, he could not sleep. He lay awake hearing Nkiru's voice in his head, "You know the truth." One evening, he overheard two men whispering behind the meeting hall. "If it wasn't her," one said slowly, "then who?" Chukwudi felt sweat trickle down his spine. For the first time since the wedding night, fear tightened around his chest. Not the fear of exposure alone, but the fear of collapse. Because lies could survive silence. But once people started asking questions, they demanded answers. And answers were dangerous. As the moon rose over Umudike, Nkiru sat alone in her room, listening to the same whispers. But this time, they no longer cut her. For the first time since her wedding night, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Hope. Not the soft, foolish kind, but the sharp, dangerous kind. The kind that waited patiently for the truth to finally bleed through the cracks. The night Chukwudi broke was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no crowd, no public confession, just fear. It happened during a family meeting. His uncles had called him in after too many whispers reached their ears. Men who once praised him were now asking questions they didn't like. Why did the first engagement fail? Why did you run from the room? Why is the story changing? Chukwudi sat on a wooden stool, sweat soaking his shirt even though the night was cool. His mother sat beside him, tense, her lips pressed tight. One uncle leaned forward. "Chukwudi, answer us plainly. Did the woman fail you, or did you fail her?" The question landed like a hammer. Chukwudi laughed weakly. "Elders, why are we reopening wounds?" "Because the wound is infected," another elder replied, "and it is starting to smell." Silence. Then his hands began to shake. At first, he tried to speak, but no sound came out. His chest tightened. His breathing became uneven. Panic rose, fast and uncontrollable. His mother reached for him. "My son, I tried," he burst out suddenly, his voice cracking. "I tried to be normal." The room froze. The elders exchanged looks. Chukwudi's face crumpled. Years of pretending collapsed in seconds. I didn't know what was wrong with me, he continued, tears spilling freely now. Doctors, herbs, prayers. Nothing worked. I was afraid. I couldn't let anyone know. His mother gasped softly. I thought marriage would fix it, he whispered. I thought when the moment came, I would become a man. His shoulders shook violently. But when I saw her waiting, I knew. I panicked. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face myself. One elder spoke quietly. So you destroyed her instead? Chukwudi nodded slowly. Yes. The confession hung in the air like smoke. By morning, the truth escaped the room. Not as a rumor, as a fact. By afternoon, Umudike buzzed with shock. He admitted it. So it was never her. Then what have we done? People avoided Nkiru's eyes, not out of disgust this time, but shame. Chukwudi did not leave his house. For the first time, he became the story. And as the village finally swallowed the truth, one question echoed louder than all the others. Would the truth come in time to save the woman they had already destroyed? Truth did not arrive in Umudike like a celebration. It came like a funeral. No drums, no ululations, only heavy footsteps and lowered eyes. When Nkiru stepped outside the morning after the confession spread, the village felt unfamiliar. The same people who once mocked her now avoided her gaze. Women who laughed behind her back suddenly found reasons to be busy. Men who had judged her whispered prayers under their breath. Guilt had replaced certainty. An elder came to her father's compound before noon, then another. By evening, a small group stood before her family, heads bowed. We wronged your daughter, the eldest among them said quietly. The blame should never have fallen on her. Ngoziaku wept openly. Nkiru said nothing, because apologies sounded empty when they arrived after the damage was done. They asked her to return to the village square the next day, to clear her name publicly, to let the truth restore her dignity. But dignity was not a cloth that could simply be washed and worn again. The next morning, the square filled slowly. People stood in clusters, unsure of where to place themselves. Chukwudi was not there. He could not face the crowd. An elder spoke. We announced today that Nkiru was innocent. She was wronged. The marriage failed because of falsehood. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some women nodded. Some men looked down. Some children asked questions their mothers could not answer. Nkiru stepped forward when invited. All eyes turned to her. She looked around at the same faces that had watched her fall. You believe me now, she said calmly. But when I cried, none of you listened. Silence. You called me names. You turned your backs. You watched my parents bend under shame. Her voice did not shake, but hearts did. The truth has spoken, she continued, but it came late, and lateness has consequences. She turned and walked away. Behind her, Umudike stood frozen, forced to confront a painful reality. Truth does not always heal. Sometimes it only exposes how cruel people were when lies felt more convenient. And in a dark room across the village, Chukwudi sat alone, hearing the same truth announced aloud, knowing that even confession could not undo what he had broken. Nkiru did not stay in Umudike. Some wounds healed better with distance. 2 weeks after the public clearing of her name, she packed her clothes quietly at dawn. No farewell ceremony, no dramatic exit. Just a small bundle, a steady breath, and a heart that had learned too much too quickly. Her mother cried as she held her. Her father finally spoke, his voice heavy with regret. Forgive us, he said. We failed you. Nkiru nodded. Forgiveness was easier than staying. She moved to the city, where no one knew her story, where her name did not carry echoes of mockery. There, she rebuilt herself slowly, piece by piece. She learned new skills, She met people who listened before judging. She discovered that she was not broken, cursed, or too much. She was simply a woman who survived cruelty. Back in Umudike, life did not return to normal. Chukwudi became a shadow of who he once was. Friends stopped visiting. Marriage proposals vanished. Mothers pulled their daughters away from him, not out of fear, but distrust. His confession had saved no one, not even himself. Some nights, he heard Nkiru's voice in his dreams, not accusing, not angry, just silent. And that silence was worse than any insult. Years later, word reached Umudike that Nkiru was thriving, independent, respected, whole. Some villagers smiled sadly when they heard her name. Others lowered their heads, because her story had become a lesson whispered to young brides and grooms alike. That pride can destroy lives. That silence can be violence. And that blaming the innocent leaves scars truth can never fully erase. As for Nkiru, she never returned to the village, not because she was afraid, but because she had outgrown it. Her marriage had ended in a single night, but her life had only just begun.